AIHI Books presents The Solomon Experiment, a bold and thoughtful response to the racial divide that still lingers in American life.
The Solomon Experiment stands as a call to conscience, a journey through reflection and reckoning. Though the road ahead is fraught with challenge, it is lit by the enduring light of truth, the healing power of empathy, and the unshakable will to build a more just tomorrow, together. It is an expression of gratitude from an immigrant, a beneficiary of the immense generosity and opportunity this nation has extended. The Solomon Experiment is a humble contribution toward keeping America the beautiful, beautiful, for all of us to share, cherish, and enjoy. Every year, America rolls out the red carpet and welcomes about 1 million new legal immigrants. That's not just a big number, it's a mic drop. It says, hey world, we're still the place to be. For a supposedly terrible and oppressive nation, according to some loud voices on social media, we sure seem to have a lot of people lining up to join the club. Next time you're at a graduation ceremony, pay attention. As the dean reads off the names, you'll hear some Smiths, Davis, Williams, and Johnsons. But increasingly, it's more like Nguyen, Hassan, Jang, Patel, or a name with too many consonants for Americans to pronounce. And guess what? Those unfamiliar names belong to people who just a few years ago may not have known how to say cheeseburger, but now they're walking across the stage as doctors of pharmacy, software engineers, or future startup millionaires who will invent the next app that wastes everyone's time or opens doors we never know existed. Yes, they came here, willingly, to suffer under the heavy hand of American oppression, where somehow they managed to buy Teslas, publish in medical journals, and earn more degrees than a regular thermometer. Oppression has never been so upwardly mobile. Of course, there's a twist. Some of these same folks, after getting a taste of freedom, success, and maybe a little avocado toast, start loudly declaring how awful America is, on TV, on podcasts, on Twitter, X. They call it a broken racist empire while sipping Starbucks and scrolling on an iPhone made possible by capitalism and free markets. The irony could power a small city. Still, America keeps the doors open, keeps handing out opportunity, and keeps letting people rise from nothing to something, even if they sometimes turn around and bite the hand that fed them. Because that's what a free society does. It lets you complain, loudly, even when the complaint itself proves the system works.
Just a thought.
When the law bends so far in normal times to accommodate sensitivities, going so far as to ban words, censor thoughts, or police intentions, what happens when a real crisis hits? If the law is already stretched to its limits for the sake of comfort and inclusivity, can it bend any further when safety, order, or survival are on the line? In times of peace and prosperity, a society can afford to debate pronouns, microaggressions, and the perceived tone of a tweet. But in times of crisis, whether it's war, economic collapse, or a national emergency, those luxuries often vanish. The question then becomes, if we've trained our institutions to prioritize feelings over facts and symbolism over strength, will they still function when the stakes are higher than hurt feelings? Can a society that struggles to define what words are acceptable find the clarity to define what actions are necessary? Can laws designed to soothe discomfort stand firm when they need to confront danger?
Just a thought.
The only way that the teeth and the tongue can coexist peacefully in such a tight, crowded space as the mouth is through understanding. The tongue, soft and flexible, must accept a basic truth. From time to time, it will cross paths with the teeth. And when that happens, when both try to occupy the same space at the same moment, there will be a bite. Not out of malice, but out of inevitability. These tongue bites are not always intentional. They aren't planned acts of aggression. They are part of the nature of things, of living closely, of functioning together in a confined space where roles and movements overlap. To live in constant interaction is to accept the occasional friction. The key is not to deny it or panic when it happens, but to expect it, learn from it, and adapt. This is more than a matter of anatomy. It is a lesson in human coexistence. In families, communities, nations where people of differing backgrounds, opinions, temperaments, and beliefs are packed into the same shared space, conflict is not a glitch in the system. It's a feature of proximity. Disagreements will happen, words will be misunderstood, feelings will get bruised. But just as the tongue doesn't declare war on the teeth after a bite, people must not treat every offense as an existential threat. Tolerance does not mean the absence of pain. It means the maturity to understand that occasional pain is the price of living in close connection with others. The goal is not to eliminate all friction, an impossible task, but to develop grace, patience, and resilience when it arises. In the end, the mouth still speaks, still chews, still sings, because the tongue and the teeth, despite their occasional clashes, know that they are better together than apart. America, through centuries of trials and errors, has managed to build a remarkable society, one where people of all races and backgrounds, Black, white, Asian, South American, and many others, can pursue their own version of happiness, at least to a meaningful extent. It is a system that, despite its flaws, offers opportunity, mobility, and freedom in ways that remain unparalleled across much of the globe. So powerful is this promise that every year, people from every corner of the earth leave behind familiarity, language, and even safety in hopes of joining the American experiment, to enjoy liberty, seek prosperity, or to chase dreams so bold they might one day leave a mark on history itself. This attraction is no small feat. The United States welcomes nearly 1 million new legal immigrants annually, a figure that speaks volumes about the enduring appeal and success of its institutions, its freedoms, and its culture. Few countries can claim such a steady inflow of hopeful newcomers. Fewer still inspire such ambition and allegiance. Yet for all its promise, America is not immune to turmoil. From time to time, incidents arise, often involving the mistreatment of a minority by an agent of the majority that seem to tear at the very fabric of the nation. In those moments, the same country that welcomes the world's dreamers is suddenly portrayed as its worst nightmare, the most racist, unjust, and irredeemable place on earth. Protests erupt, dialogue breaks down, trust erodes. The Solomon Experiment takes this deep and recurring tension seriously. Rather than endlessly repeating the same cycles of outrage and resistance, this book proposes a bold yet peaceful alternative, a structured and symbolic split of the American system. Not a secession, not a divorce, but a deliberate social experiment designed to test a different way of addressing our deepest divisions. In this model, communities might be reorganized in such a way that racial tensions, especially those between Black citizens and white agents of the state, such as police, are systematically minimized or perhaps even eliminated altogether. By removing the trigger points of conflict, we can observe whether mutual trust and communal stability improve under different conditions. At the conclusion of the experiment, the nation would face a choice: to keep the new system if it has proven more harmonious and just for the majority, or to revert to the prior arrangement if unity and integration are still the shared goal. Either path could be seen as a success, because in both scenarios, we would have learned something invaluable about who we are and what kind of society we truly want to become. Whether temporary or permanent, the Solomon Experiment is not about division for its own sake. It is about exploration, reflection, and the courage to imagine solutions outside the bounds of traditional politics. The chapters that follow will explain how such an experiment might work and why it could offer hope in a time when conventional approaches have too often failed us. Chapter 1. A time for everything. There is a time for everything, a time to pretend and a time to stop pretending. We now find ourselves at a moment when pretending no longer soothes our pain, Instead, it only prolongs and intensifies it. For decades, we have searched for common ground between black and white Americans. We thought we found it on July 2, 1964, when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, a sweeping measure that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It was a landmark achievement. Yet more than half a century later, many of the same grievances persist. Black Americans still speak of injustice, inequality, and mistreatment, echoes of the very struggles that law sought to resolve. Each time a member of the minority community is harmed, particularly by a white person in a position of authority, often a police officer, the nation seems to convulse. The event is interpreted not as an isolated act, but as proof that America is fundamentally broken, irredeemably racist. Yet in quieter times, one might look around and reasonably believe that blacks and whites live in relative harmony. They attend the same schools, worship in the same churches, receive care in the same hospitals. They marry one another, raise families together, work side by side, even venture into space together. On the surface, race seems to have lost its divisive power. But beneath that surface lies a complex and fragile truth. America swings with remarkable ease from coexistence to chaos. Why? Because order takes effort, sustained, conscious effort, while disorder needs only a spark. One unruly sheep can scatter a herd. The original sin here is the belief, quietly embedded into the fabric of human thought, that blacks and whites are fundamentally different races. As long as this belief lingers, our unity will remain fragile. We will keep returning to the same painful cycle every time a white officer harms a defenseless black person. If there were no concept of race, there would be no racism. But we continue to divide people by race without even agreeing on what that term truly means. Ask someone to define race, and you may get vague answers. But ask who a racist is, and the response is immediate: the white man. This is not a scientific definition. It is a social reflex. As black Americans, when we are honest enough to look in the mirror, we may see that by our own definitions, we too hold racial biases. Yet we rationalize them, dressing them up as cultural preference or reverse racism. But reverse or not, racism is racism. Most people we call racists are not filled with hatred. They are filled with preference. Preferists, if the word existed. In truth, human beings tend to prefer their own kind. It's not always malicious, it's natural. This preference, however, can be misinterpreted by others as racism. Even within our own group, we have preferences. That is why I must now contradict myself. In the purest sense of the term, few people are racists. Most of us simply feel more comfortable with those who look, speak, or think like us. The system, however, must rise above preference. It must remain neutral and just. Today, we often judge racism not by actions, but by words. A middle-aged white woman on the show 90 Day Fiancé was accused of being racist after reportedly using the N-word with her Nigerian husband. Yet this same woman traveled across the world, fell in love with someone entirely different from herself, married him, and brought him to America. Is she a racist because of a word, however offensive, or does her life suggest otherwise? In our culture, deeds seem to matter less than diction. That is a dangerous reversal of values. Our struggle to achieve true racial harmony is endlessly complicated. Some have built entire careers advocating for marginalized groups. While their efforts are needed, others exploit our divisions, inflaming tensions to maintain influence. They thrive on our imperfection. Meanwhile, a second group genuinely believes change is needed but offers unrealistic solutions, like abolishing the police force altogether. Defund the police has become their rallying cry, one that even some politicians parrot out of fear rather than conviction. But anyone with basic common sense knows that a society without law enforcement quickly descends into chaos. Then there is the third group, the largest, the followers. They drift with the loudest voice, the angriest crowd. They burn their own neighborhoods in protest, vandalize statues and buildings, and target businesses that have done them no harm. They are not driven by logic, but by emotion. America has been pretending that those who act as though we're still living in the 1950s will eventually realize it's 2020. But that awakening hasn't come. Black news anchors earning millions still speak of injustice, claiming things are worse now than before. Many of us believe them, without question. America finds itself at a painful impasse. Our leaders and public figures seem paralyzed, unsure how to satisfy the demands of minority groups. Not because they haven't tried, but because they already have. The system has bent and bent again. It has changed its language, policies, and attitudes. It has banned words. It has rewritten laws. And still, it is not enough. When police officers kneel in public to ask for forgiveness and are met with more rage, when business owners apologize for long-forgotten missteps and still watch their stores burn, when religious institutions, never involved in the politics of race, align themselves with activist movements and are still condemned, we must ask, is reconciliation even possible? We are drifting farther apart, and like the tongue and teeth in the mouth, we must recognize that sometimes, inevitably, they will collide. The occasional bite is not a failure of the system, but a feature of life in close quarters. Can the law be unjust? Absolutely. Do unjust laws make a society unjust? Yes. But do just laws automatically create a just society? No. Just laws cannot prevent individuals from doing harm. That's where many go wrong. We expect the law to fix human nature. We too often respond to isolated incidents as if they are proof that the entire system is rotten. But a country cannot be labeled unjust simply because an individual broke the law. The law already prohibits such abuse. It punishes it. The true injustice would be if the system protected the perpetrator. When a crime is committed by one rogue officer, the solution is not to burn the city or rewrite the Constitution. It is to apply the law. The Black community's central demand is justice. But what if the system is already just, and what we really want is safety, or vengeance, or emotional repair? Lawmakers are puzzled, not because they don't care, but because no one can tell them what law to change. Those of us who come from countries where lawlessness reigns understand America is not perfect, but it is profoundly fair. Here, a citizen's rights are real, and when someone violates them, consequences follow. Even our heroes may have misunderstood this truth. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important." With deep respect, I disagree. No law can prevent a lynching. It can discourage it, it can punish it, but it cannot stop it before it happens. The law does not have the power to preempt evil, only to respond to it. Each time a white police officer abuses a Black citizen, we label it as injustice. But that act, unless protected or ignored by the law, is not injustice. It is a crime. A nation is unjust only when its laws or institutions permit harm, reward it, or ignore it. In a truly unjust society, the weak do not even dare seek justice. In such a society, the powerful wrong the powerless, and the powerless know not to ask for help, because doing so only brings more pain. That is not America. Some argue that the system must be changed every time a tragedy occurs. But no system, no matter how refined, can prevent every evil act. The answer is not always a new law. Sometimes the answer is better enforcement. Sometimes it's better people. Are Black voices unheard in America? No. We have senators, congresspeople, mayors, governors, even a former president. If our voices are still not heard, perhaps we are misusing the power we've gained. And yet, despite this progress, many still act as if nothing has changed. That is why I believe we must try something new. Not another reform, but a bold social experiment. I call it the Solomon Experiment, and it may offer the kind of insight and clarity we've never been able to achieve through protest, politics, or policy. The details of this experiment and the rationale behind it are the subject of the next chapter. The Solomon Experiment, as its name suggests, draws inspiration from a well-known biblical episode in which King Solomon, renowned for his divine wisdom, resolved an impossible dispute between two women who each gave birth around the same time. One of the babies did not survive. Both women claimed to be the mother of the surviving infant, and at that time there was no way, no DNA testing, no eyewitnesses, to determine who was telling the truth. Solomon's solution was bold and shocking. He ordered the living child to be cut in half and divided between the two women. One woman agreed to this brutal compromise. The other cried out in anguish, begging the king to give the child to her rival rather than see him harmed. That heartfelt plea revealed the truth. The real mother would rather lose her child than see him destroyed. Justice was served not through violence, but through wisdom and insight into the human heart. The proposal I call the Solomon experiment does not mirror all aspects of that ancient judgment, but it carries the same spirit. The idea is not to destroy what we have, but to see how far we are willing to go to preserve it. We have inherited a country that, for all its faults, remains the most desired destination on earth. People risk everything, crossing deserts, oceans, and bureaucratic labyrinths just to be part of the American story. But if that story is so deeply fractured along racial lines, then perhaps it's time to ask, are we willing to make a bold, even uncomfortable gesture to preserve peace? Are we willing, metaphorically, to split the system, not the country, to save it? If Black Americans feel so afraid of white police officers that even a routine traffic stop triggers panic, if the system is perceived as so biased that every encounter risks escalation, then perhaps we should consider a new structure. What if we made it so that Black citizens are only policed by Black officers? What if white officers never had jurisdiction to arrest or question Black individuals, and vice versa? This alone could dramatically reduce the fear that fuels tension during police encounters. With less fear, there would be less resistance. With less resistance, fewer confrontations. With fewer confrontations, fewer deaths, and far fewer riots. This proposal is the softest version of the Solomon experiment, a virtual separation, not a physical or political one, a reorganization of responsibility, not a division of territory. Black officers arrest Black suspects. White officers arrest white suspects. Mixed patrols could remain, but the lead in any arrest or intervention would be based on the race of the individual involved. This is not about superiority, it's about safety. It's about removing the volatile racial dynamic that so often ignites public outrage. The experiment could also be expanded into other areas of the justice system. For example, many Black Americans feel that their treatment in court is unfair, that they are more likely to be charged, convicted, and sentenced harshly compared to their white counterparts. Whether this is perception or reality, the distrust is real. And where there is no trust, there can be no peace. Under the Solomon model, Black defendants would appear before Black judges. If the trial involves a jury, it would be composed exclusively of Black jurors. The same rule would apply to white defendants. Critics may call this separatism, but if applied fairly and temporarily, it could be a form of restorative justice, an intentional attempt to eliminate unconscious bias, cultural misunderstanding, or historical mistrust from the courtroom. Would it be perfect? No. But it may be better than pretending a broken system is working. Even incarceration under this model would be adjusted. Black and white inmates could remain in the same facilities, but correctional officers would be assigned based on race, with each guard responsible for supervising members of their own racial group. This might reduce claims of mistreatment and abuse and help prevent some of the racial flashpoints that have erupted in the past. Of course, such a system would come with its own complications. No solution this radical is without side effects. What happens when racial identity isn't visually clear? How would we handle mixed-race individuals? What if someone prefers to be judged or policed by a person of another race? These are real questions, and I will address them in future chapters. But before we dismiss this idea as extreme or impractical, we must ask ourselves, how long can we continue with the current pattern, where tragedy strikes, outrage follows, and nothing fundamentally changes? The beauty of the Solomon experiment is that it is not permanent. It is a test. It is a mirror held up to the nation, asking, what would peace look like? What would justice feel like if every citizen knew their fear of racial bias had been removed from the equation? And perhaps most importantly, if such a system did in fact reduce violence, fear, and mistrust, what would that tell us about ourselves? If it fails, we return to what we had. If it succeeds, we may discover a blueprint for deeper unity, one forged not by pretending we are already healed, but by acknowledging our wounds and finding new ways to treat them. In the next chapter, we will explore the challenges, contradictions, and possible unintended consequences of applying the Solomon experiment. For every solution creates new problems, but no progress comes without daring to try. Chapter 3. The Solomon Experiment is infallible. Why do I dare say that the Solomon Experiment is infallible? After all, no human system is perfect. Every structure built by flawed individuals carries the seeds of its own potential failure. So how can I claim that this one, radical, untested, and controversial, cannot fail? Simple, because even in failure, it succeeds. If the Solomon Experiment is applied and does not deliver the expected results, the natural consequence would be to return to the current system. And in that return, we would do so not blindly, but with clarity, with a newfound appreciation for what we once had. Its failure would serve as a lens, giving us permission to look back at the status quo not as a broken relic of the past, but as something worth preserving, refining, or even restoring. Ironically, its failure would be the very proof of its usefulness. Picture it, black and white police officers patrolling together again, working side by side to serve all communities, pursuing criminals regardless of skin tone. If the Solomon Experiment does not yield better results, that old way of doing things will look far less oppressive and far more functional than many critics currently claim. Now let's be honest, the Solomon Experiment is not a silver bullet. It won't solve poverty. It won't cure inequality. It won't fix education gaps or rewrite economic history, but it may solve one very specific, very volatile problem, the issue of white police brutality toward black citizens. Just that. If a black suspect is approached by a black officer, the assumption of racial bias dissolves. Even in the tragic case where a black officer unjustly kills a black individual, the racial interpretation, the very thing that fuels explosive protests, evaporates. The media, in that case, won't call it racism. They'll call it what it is, a tragedy, an error, maybe even an accident. No one will fill the streets. BLM won't march. CNN won't break into live coverage. No one will burn down AutoZone. The racial fuse will be cut. Why? Because we have reached a point in American discourse where, for better or worse, racism is believed to run in only one direction. Black people, we're told, and we often believe, cannot be racist. So if the person wielding the badge and gun is also black, then the event cannot be labeled racism. End of discussion. Problem contained. Of course, applying the Solomon Experiment won't be without serious challenges. One of the most immediate and obvious obstacles will be logistical imbalance. The ratio of black to white judges in America is starkly uneven. According to a 2017 report, 71% of judges were white, while only 14% were black. If black defendants can only appear before black judges, the system will likely bottleneck. Some may sit in jail longer awaiting trial, not because of guilt, but because of availability. Ironically, the experiment meant to reduce injustice might temporarily feel like more of it, and that could become the breaking point. If delays feel worse than perceived bias, black defendants may demand a return to the old system. Then there's the issue of juries. The Solomon Experiment proposes racially matched juries, black jurors for black defendants, white jurors for white defendants. But finding 12, or 13, including alternates, black jurors regularly and reliably may prove difficult. Jury pools will need to be drawn more frequently from smaller communities, and many black citizens, like all citizens, are not eager to be called for jury duty more often. Still, this matching approach could resolve a long-standing grievance: the systematic removal of black jurors through peremptory challenges. The Equal Justice Initiative has published extensive documentation of this practice. The Solomon model would neutralize it entirely. No prosecutor could alter the racial composition of a jury that is predetermined by law. But this opens a more complex can of worms. What about the race of the victim? If a white defendant is tried by an all-white jury for a crime committed against a black victim, could justice still be served? What about the reverse? These are valid, even troubling questions. Critics will no doubt point to them as reasons to dismiss the model. But we must weigh this against the benefit of dramatically reducing the most volatile form of racial violence, perceived or real, that of law enforcement officers harming people of color. As for legal counsel, The Solomon experiment does not impose any racial restrictions. Defendants, black or white, may choose lawyers of any race. In fact, one might argue that representation could be stronger when cultural understanding aligns. A black attorney representing a black defendant might better navigate subtle cultural contexts, just as a white lawyer may more intuitively connect with a white jury. But the choice remains with the accused. This is where freedom still reigns. But let's not be naive. The Solomon experiment will face enormous resistance. Why? Because there are powerful stakeholders in the status quo. A great many careers, organizations, and advocacy empires are built on the ongoing struggle. Activists, lawyers, media figures, and nonprofits have crafted identities and fundraising platforms around civil rights work. The more permanent the conflict, the more permanent their relevance. If a simple restructuring like the Solomon experiment could diffuse racial tension without burning buildings or canceling institutions, these groups would lose their stage. They won't let that happen quietly. If implemented through normal legislative channels, the experiment would likely die in committee. If imposed by executive order, lawsuits would follow within hours. Opponents would denounce it as unconstitutional, segregational, regressive. They would dust off the ugliest words in the political dictionary: racist, divisive, backward, dangerous. Clever lawyers would make impassioned arguments that using race as a determining factor, even in the name of peace, is a civil rights violation. And yet, no one seems to realize that we're already doing it in reverse. We already demand diversity quotas, sensitivity training, and affirmative representation based on race. Why not at least test a model that uses race not to divide, but to de-escalate? The irony is thick. The Solomon experiment is above all a thought experiment, a temporary trial, a mirror held up to our fractured system. If it fails, we learn. If it works, we evolve. If nothing else, it gives us the courage to confront our dysfunction, not by burning down the system, but by reshaping it with surgical precision. In the next chapter, we will explore the deeper societal, philosophical, and even spiritual implications of this experiment. For the problem of race in America is not merely political, it is moral, cultural, and human, and it will not be solved by outrage alone. Chapter 4. An unforgettable moment. In liberal circles, police officers have long carried a tarnished reputation. One doesn't need to search far in the archives of talk shows, late-night television, or political commentary to find countless examples where hostility toward law enforcement is loudly and proudly expressed. In many progressive spaces, criticism of the police isn't just common, it's almost expected. Yet sometimes, in the midst of a storm of negativity, a small moment breaks through the noise, quiet, unscripted, and profoundly human. I want to share one such moment. It happened during a late-night radio program, sometime in the late 1990s. Unfortunately, this was long before we could easily archive and fact-check everything with a quick online search. So you'll have to take me at my word. I assure you, this story is true. I was driving late one evening, listening to the radio in my car. The host and a guest were engaged in a spirited conversation about police brutality. Judging by the energy and indignation in their voices, I assumed they were reacting to a recent high-profile incident, likely involving a member of a minority group and a police officer. The discussion was intense and critical, filled with all the familiar arguments: the misuse of force, systemic racism, the imbalance of power. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, if such a topic can be enjoyed, two voices echoing each other's frustrations in the comfort of shared outrage. Then, a caller joined the show. He sounded like the kind of frequent contributor these late-night programs tend to attract, someone with enough familiarity and presence that he felt like part of the extended radio family. From his tone and rhythm, it seemed he was also driving while listening and calling in. But he wanted to make a more focused point, and for safety's sake, he pulled over to the shoulder of the expressway. Remember, the topic of conversation was police brutality. As the caller began to make his case, he suddenly paused and said, "Excuse me for a moment." A police officer had approached his parked vehicle. The entire exchange that followed was heard live on the air. The officer asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes," the caller responded. The officer followed up, "Are you sure you're all right?" Again, the caller answered, "Yes." Without pressing further, the officer simply said, "Okay," and walked back to his patrol car. The encounter ended as quickly and quietly as it began, and then, just like that, the caller returned to the conversation. The host and guest resumed their discussion, continuing on as if nothing significant had happened. They dove back into the familiar narrative of mistrust, abuse, and injustice at the hands of the police. But for me, alone in my car, something about that small interaction stuck. It was, in a word, beautiful. Here was a police officer, in the middle of the night, checking on a stranger sitting in a car on the side of the highway. Not with aggression, not with suspicion, but with concern. He asked a simple question, "Are you all right?" Twice. Not to intimidate, not to arrest, not to investigate, but to ensure someone's safety. That moment, brief and unscripted, was a reminder of what good policing looks like. It was a small act of empathy, and it happened live on a show that had devoted its airtime to condemning the very institution this officer represented. What struck me even more was the complete lack of acknowledgement from the host and guest. They acted as if it hadn't happened, as if this moment of decency had no place in the narrative. They didn't stop to say, "Well, that was surprising," or "Not all officers are bad." They simply kept talking. To me, that was a missed opportunity, not just for the show, but for all of us. Because the path to reconciliation between the police and the communities they serve is not paved solely with policies, reforms, or task forces. Those things help. But real change, lasting change, comes from moments like that one, small, human, and visible. We need to see those moments. The public needs to see those moments. The media, so quick to amplify horror, needs to broadcast empathy with the same volume. We need to catch officers doing the right thing, not to pretend that abuse doesn't exist, but to show that it is not the whole story. Far from it. There are countless officers who serve with honor, patience, and quiet compassion. They de-escalate, they listen, they help, but their stories rarely make the headlines. And yet, if we want to heal the relationship between law enforcement and the people, showcasing these positive encounters is arguably more powerful than any public relations campaign or diversity seminar. Imagine a program, not one built in an office, but built through storytelling, where real stories of kindness, restraint, and service by police officers are collected and shared, not to excuse the wrongs, but to balance the scale. To remind us that even in the midst of controversy, there are good people doing difficult jobs with heart and integrity. That one small moment on a late-night radio show, quick, quiet, and ignored, was unforgettable for me because it showed what is possible, and more importantly, it showed what is real. Chapter 5. The Woman at the End of the Table. This story takes place in a small training room just outside Washington, D.C., during a time of political fervor and rising emotion. It was just before Barack Obama would go on to become President of the United States. The country was deep in election season, and even in private circles, the mood was charged. Debates were everywhere, and ours was no exception. That day, we were 5 or 6 people, close enough to be candid, diverse enough for sparks to fly. All of us were black. Most were African immigrants, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Ethiopian. I was the only one from the Caribbean, a proud son of Haiti. It began like many conversations do, focused on one topic before taking a hard turn. What started as a casual conversation drifted quickly into politics. From politics, it turned into something sharper, a full-throated critique of America. My friends didn't hold back. They criticized the racism, the inequality, the foreign policy, the arrogance, the historical wrongs, everything. America was, in their view, deeply flawed, if not outright hypocritical. I sat at the center of it all, defending the country I had adopted as home, my America the Beautiful, the place that had given me safety, opportunity, and a future I could never have imagined back home. I tried to push back against their cynicism, not to deny the truth of their grievances, but to show that there was another side to the story. Yes, America has its faults, but America also has ideals. It has open doors. It has laws that mean something. It offers second chances and new beginnings. For me, it was still the best place on earth. They were all against me, except one woman. She had been there the entire time, sitting quietly at the end of the table. She hadn't said a single word throughout the entire heated exchange. She watched, she listened. I assumed, as many men do, that she was simply letting the guys wear themselves out with argument. Maybe she didn't want to enter the fray. Maybe she didn't have an opinion. But when the debate finally died down, after we'd exhausted ourselves repeating the same points, raising our voices, waving our hands in frustration, something remarkable happened. As the others began to gather their things and trickle out of the room, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of 1,000 storms. She said, "I will never use my lips to criticize America, because when I was hiding in the bush for weeks, fleeing from my own African brothers who were chasing us like wild animals with guns and machetes, it was young white American soldiers who found me. They rescued me from that nightmare. They looked like angels when we saw them coming through the trees. I will never speak a bad word about America." And just like that, the room fell into silence. No one replied. No one challenged her. No one needed to. Her words hung in the air like a sacred truth, a truth that didn't erase everything that had been said, but placed it all into a sobering context. For her, America wasn't just a concept. It wasn't just an imperfect system to critique or a government to distrust. It was rescue. It was safety. It was hope arriving in uniform, with outstretched hands and strange accents, in the middle of a nightmare. She reminded us of something we often forget in the comfort of our complaints, that for many, America is not the problem. It is the solution. It was a moment I will never forget. That woman at the end of the table taught us more in 30 seconds than we had managed to teach each other in an hour of shouting. Her silence had not been indifference. It had been reverence. And when she spoke, she reminded us that gratitude and criticism are not mutually exclusive, but that sometimes gratitude deserves the final word.
A last note. We need the police.
Events often speak louder than words. I've written many words in this short volume, thousands in fact, with the hope of helping you see America from a different perspective. I've shared stories, arguments, analogies, and even bold proposals like the Solomon experiment. But now, as I reach the end, I admit something important. I'm not sure my words are enough. My goal was not to glorify a flawless nation. No such place exists. My goal was to help you see that, despite our divisions, our stumbles, and our sometimes painful history, you are living in a country that is still among the greatest on earth. A country with problems, yes, but also with laws, freedoms, opportunity, and more importantly, hope. I wanted to show what could happen if we continue down the road of hyperpolarization. If we keep pulling at the fabric that holds us together, one day the threads may snap. That glue, that fragile bond of shared values and mutual respect, could dissolve, and we will all feel the consequences. Ironically, I wrote about the Solomon experiment not to promote it, but to make the case against needing it. I wanted to open your eyes to how far things could go if we forget how much we already have. I wanted to remind you that America is okay. Not perfect, not finished, but still just, still decent, still capable of rising above its flaws. The systems we have, imperfect though they are, work more often than they fail. And that includes one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated systems of all, our police. I have tried to convince you that, despite the stories that dominate headlines, most police officers are professionals. They are human beings who step into danger so we don't have to. They are flawed, like the rest of us, but they serve with courage more often than they slip into error. And when they do their job right, no one cheers. But when they do it wrong, the whole world watches. And still, I know, words may not convince you, but one day, a single moment will. That moment will come when your world suddenly feels unsafe, when something goes terribly wrong, when you or someone you love is in danger. It may be the middle of the night or the middle of a sunny afternoon, and you will reach for your phone and dial 3 numbers, 911. In that moment, the police won't be a symbol or a headline or a statistic. They will become angels. They will become the people you hope get there fast. They will be the ones you wait for, like salvation. And when they arrive, armed, alert, focused, you will breathe easier. Because help has come. That call, more than any essay, will convince you we need the police. The police are not perfect. No one is. But they are necessary. They are there when it matters most. And for that, we owe them more than suspicion. We owe them gratitude, support, and yes, accountability. America is still a good country. Let's not tear it apart trying to make it perfect. Let's preserve what works. Let's fix what's broken. Let's choose unity before division becomes permanent. We still have time.